and welcome to Galley Stories, stories of the Bering Sea and beyond, hosted by Mark Kaler. My name is Penka Jane, podcast deckhand and longtime listener. We'd thank you to subscribe to the podcast and leave us a review. Here's today's catch.
Hello guys, welcome back to another installment of Galley Stories, stories of the Bering Sea and beyond. I am your host, Mark Kaler. And today we're sitting on the Lady Alaska in beautiful St. Paul, Alaska. We have Captain Scott Campbell. Most people don't know him by Scott Campbell. Everybody just calls him Junior. How you doing today, Junior?
I'm doing great. Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time.
Oh, absolutely.
Well, you're on a busy schedule, and so let's just start at the beginning, Scott, or Junior. Where were you born and what brought you into the industry?
So I was born in Walla Walla, Washington in 1974. My dad started his fishing career in 1974 up out of Kodiak. He started working for my uncle, his older brother, in the shrimp fisheries. This is, some of the guys were crab fishing back then, some guys were shrimp fishing back then. And at the time, my dad came up and was working on a shrimp boat. And so we moved up to Kodiak in 78, and we were there through the king crab boom until it crashed in 1983. Then we moved back down to Walla Walla, Washington. My dad bought a farm and became a farmer/fisherman. The two worst occupations to ever be in, for the simple fact, no matter how good you are of a farmer or how good you are of a fisherman, Mother Nature can destroy you every time.
Either way,
didn't matter. He had a double-edged sword and he was getting jabbed on both ends. About the time that he got into the farming, they had some severe weather, they lost several crops, and he was actually fishing to support his farming habit. But at that time, the fisheries were starting to collapse a little bit as well. So, I mean, he was fishing, 6 months out of the year. He'd get off the plane, he'd jump on a tractor, and he'd be putting in 18 hours days in the farm. So, work has kind of been instilled into my whole childhood. I had to take care of the farm when Dad was gone. I was 8, 9 years old, out changing water, digging ditches. I mean, it's been ingrained into my system to work since the day I was born, pretty much.
So when did you first go to sea? I imagine it was with your dad.
Yeah, it was funny because, I used to play sports so that the real story why I got into sports is because if I was playing sports, I didn't have to work on the farm until at least after I was done with the sports for the day. So it cut out about 3-4 hours there. So I got into sports pretty heavy. But on the same token, my dad needed me to come up and he wanted me to get a work ethic instilled into me at a very young age. So when I was 15 years old, I would get out of school early. I would do all my testing early on the last quarter, and I would come up and finish off the paleo season. So I started crab fishing when I was 15.
On your dad's boat?
On my dad's boat. I started crab fishing when I was 15 on my dad's boat. And then when I got out of school, when I graduated from high school, my dad's like, hey, I do not want you fishing. I want you to go to college. I want you to, pick a different career. You've got work ethic. You'll be just fine. I didn't want to do anything else but fish. So my first time up that I was actually a true crab fisherman, he brought me up in January, and the weather was miserable. He told the guys, I do not want this kid here. I want him to go to college. Just do whatever you got to do. Destroy him, mentally break him, do whatever you got to do. Well, about 3 weeks in, they'd done a pretty good job. I was ready to quit, but I wasn't going to give my dad the satisfaction of quitting, so I decided to tough it out for 3 months. We finished off the paleo season, and I remember I was like 19 years old, and I had a $30,000 check, and I thought I was rich, man. 30 grand is like all the money in the world, man. 30 grand, I'm 19, yeah. So I get home, and I got sick. I got home on a Friday, and I was just newly married, and my wife says, we need to get, because she was a nurse at the time going through nursing school, we need to get health insurance. I'm like, I just got home, we'll do it Monday. Saturday, I had appendicitis attack. Sunday, I had to have surgery. Monday, I got a $33,000 bill for the surgery. My $30,000 check went real quick.
Oh, my goodness.
So then all of a sudden, I realized my hands really didn't hurt that bad. It wasn't that tough. I was able to suffer through the first season. I came back fishing, and then my career started from there. Okay. My dad knew he couldn't my dad knew he couldn't break me at that point. So he said, well, we might as well teach this kid how to work.
I always ask everybody, what'd you do with that first big check you got? And it's always a car, it's a truck, it's some extravagant vacation. You had an appendicitis.
Yeah, I had to pay medical bills with my first big check.
$3,000.
Oh, I was $3,000 in the hole, and then plus I had to pay taxes too. So I was really in the hole. It was horrible. But yeah, that was my first crabbing experience coming out into the Bering Sea. as a full-time fisherman was a horrible experience. I never wanted to do it again, and then I lost all my money to appendicitis attack, so I had to come back. And my plan was just to fish one more season so that I could get that money back, so I could put it down on a house and then go to college, and it just never materialized. I got the bug, and I like that quick cash, and I like to be able to go home and just take a break and not have to do anything, and the lifestyle just got ingrained in my system.
So before we move too far along, I'd like to know, you talked about 19, your dad wanted you busted, and these guys worked at it. What were some of the things that were going on that they were doing to you?
So a lot of the things that they would do, like, with greenhorns nowadays, you try and make their life, you try and pass on all the tricks of the trade, like, hey, you come in after a string, turn your gloves inside out. Starting with dry gloves, dry clothes, eating food, doing all the little things that give you the energy and being warm and stuff like that. I'd be up sitting in the forepeak. I was told that if I couldn't come back across the stack unless I had a buddy with me. And so my buddy would never wait for me. I'd have to do bait on my own, and I could never keep up because I was greenhorn. Greenhorns can never keep up on bait. So on a 5-mile run, I might be 3 miles in and have 2 miles where I could come in and change. Well, I didn't have anybody that I could come across the stack with. I didn't have my buddy. So I'd be sitting up forward, and I'd throw my gloves off, and they'd be down on the forepeak. They'd be washing around in water. I had wet gloves all the time. I was in wet clothes. Every now and then they'd bring me out a sandwich or something. But for the most part, I wasn't eating. I was in wet clothes all day. I wasn't taking care of my hands, and it just, I was miserable out there. I was seasick. I was puking all the time.
You were living in the forepeak.
I was living in the forepeak, and I'd get to come back on my sleep rotation. That was the only time I'd get to come back, and they would make everything hard on me. They'd whip me in the back of the legs with the door tie if I took too long getting the bait in and out of the pots. They'd drop doors on my head, just because I was too slow, and I was slowing down the operation. So they'd say, 5 seconds, door's coming down, and I'd just be backing out and hit me on top of the head. And it was miserable. It was a different time back then. Back then in the open access fisheries, time was money. And if you were wasting their time, you were wasting their money.
Back then, what was the sleep rotation like?
So back then, what you would do is we'd add 6 guys on deck, or 6 crew rotation, and we'd have 5 guys on deck. So it was supposed to be 20 hours on, 4 hours off. And that 4 hours, you get 3 hours and 40 minutes, and give you 20 minutes to get up, get your stuff on, and be back out on deck. But those rotations never worked. It was more like 32 hours because something would happen. You'd have to have everybody out on deck, and then then you'd start the rotation again. So it was more like 32 and 3.
Okay.
So it was pretty brutal. When you're 19 years old and going, used to sleeping 6-8 hours a day, and you go to 3 hours of sleep every 32 hours, and then you're hurting, your hands are hurting. So that 3 hours, you're not really sleeping, you're just resting. It was the most mentally challenged thing I've ever done in my life.
And so, how long were the seasons then?
Back then, the seasons were 3 to 6 months for snow crab, the peleo crab, and then you would go tendering in the summer. Usually you get the boat back around May. You would do a little quick shipyard, paint it up, do some maintenance on it. You'd go tendering all summer long. As soon as you were done with that, you'd beeline up to St. Matthews and do a blue crab fishery, which was kind of your warm-up for a red king fishery, so it was a blue king crab fishery. And that was usually just a couple of weeks, nice weather in September, kind of get you broke back into the fall there. And after red king crab, then you go into a tanner crab fishery and fish till November. So really you got December off. That was your time off. You're fishing 10, 11 months out of the year.
Yeah. It's quite a toll on you at 19 years old.
Oh yeah, 19 years old, that was brutal. You just wanted to take a break, get home, go and enjoy being home, and you were the new guy on the dock or the new guy on the boat. So anytime somebody wanted to take time off, you were the first guy to get the call. And if you said no, there was another new guy on the dock ready to replace you.
Even though you were working on your dad's boat?
Even though I was working on my dad's boat, I didn't get. My dad made it harder for me than he made it for anybody else. Any other greenhorn, he would have gave him a little slack, let him have some time off. But with me, he was twice as hard because he never wanted me in the fishery.
We can see that from your first time out as a full share creamer. So what about going back then the second time? Things got easier? You knew what you were in for?
Honestly, you mentally were kind of prepared. You knew what you were going to be in for. And then it's so funny because when you do something the first time, it never makes sense. You're doing everything the hard way. You take a little break from it, you come back, And then all of a sudden, it's like, oh, I see how those guys are tying up the buoys. I see why they're doing it. That's an easier way. So you start to adapt. And then your body's kind of tuned in and knows, okay, well, we're going to have hell to pay here for the first 2 weeks, and then you're going to get over your aches and pains, and you start to become accustomed to the work, is the best way to put it.
And being able to keep up with your buddy?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I made sure that on that second season, I never fell behind on bait. So when everybody was going back, I was going back with them.
All right. How long did you have to do bait and then move on to the next spot?
It took me quite a while because, all the guys that were on the boat, they've been on the boat for like 7-8 years. So, basically somebody had to quit or not show up for you to be able to move up back then. Mm-hmm. So I was on the bait rotation for about a year, a year and a half. And we had a guy that didn't show up. So I got thrown into a position that I wasn't ready for, a full share position, but I wasn't going to pass up the opportunity because if they would have brought another full share in, I'd probably still be a bait boy on that boat.
Which boat was it?
It was Arctic Lady.
Arctic Lady.
Yep, Arctic Lady was the first boat I ever worked on.
That's your first commercial.
Yeah, that was the first commercial boat I ever worked on.
She's still running around.
Oh yeah, the Arctic Lady's still around. That thing's still a highliner of the fleet. It was a highliner back then, and it's still a highliner today.
Okay. And then what boat did you move on? Well, let's talk about your progression. So then you went up to a full cruise share guy.
Yeah, so I went to a full cruise share boat, or I went to a full cruise share guy on the Arctic Lady, but I knew I was kind of limited. There was so many guys in front of me, I knew I was never going to get an opportunity to advance. I was still low man on the totem pole, even though I was full share. So I made a conscious decision to make a move over to the Lady Alaska. And when I moved over to the Lady Alaska,
we're sitting on the
Lady Alaska.
Okay.
Now there's a story behind that too. We'll get to that. So anyway, I moved over to the Lady Alaska. I worked for a guy by the name of Bill Whiting, and he'd owned other boats, and he was running this boat at the time. I never really understood why he never ran his own boats. He'd always run somebody else's boat. And anyway, he was out brown crab fishing. So I jumped into the brown crab fishery out the Lucian chain, went out and learned how to long line crab pots. Worked for him. He was impressed with my work ethic that my dad had instilled in me. And he says, hey, I've got this boat called the Amatuli. I'd like you to go run it for a cod fishery if you're interested. And of course, first thing I say is yes, of course I'm ready, So I called my dad up. I was so excited. I'm like, Dad, Bill's going to give me an opportunity to run the Amatuli. I says, what do you think about that? I thought I was going to have support from my dad. And he tells me, he says, you're not ready, and hung up the phone.
And how old were you?
I was 24 at the time. 24. He tells me, you're not ready, and hung up the phone. He says, you got no business running a boat. You're not ready. So that was pretty deflating for me. But I found out years later that he was doing that because he knew if he told me that, it would challenge me to make me prove him wrong. So, he was doing a little psychological mind game.
Sounds like that first season of crab,
yeah,
too.
It was like my first season being a greenhorn. He knew if he kind of beat me down a little bit, I was going to do everything in my power to prove my father wrong.
And did you?
The first season, I will admit I was not ready. I did not do all that well. I got all the crew back safe. We had a mediocre season. I learned a lot. But then that next year, I did a little bit better, and then a little bit better, and started working my way up. And then guys heard about how well I was doing, and then I got opportunities to run better boats. So
better boats than the Amatuli?
Better boats than the Amatuli. The Amatuli was pretty run down when I got it. It was a beautiful boat back in the 70s and 80s. It was the pride of the fleet, but the maintenance had been let go by the time I got onto it in the late 90s. It was pretty run down. My first season out crab fishing with that thing, I took it out. We were going out. We had a 3-week strike. I'd taken a load out to St. Paul because it was a small boat, so I had to take 2 loads of gear out. This is an open access fishery. The strike comes, the ice is moving down. The owner's calling me up, hey, where do you got the gear? And I says, I got it at St. Paul. He says, hey, you need to get that gear and get it moved down to St. George because the ice is going to cover it up before the strike settles. We take off, we go up to get the gear moved, and we lost our air compressor. And our throttles that control the boat to give it power are pneumatic, so they rely on air pressure. The air pressure dropped down, the boat got sideways in the trough. It was 26 foot wide, more than 30 foot seas, so you can imagine it was pretty violent. I just got down into the engine room to figure out what was going on because I just knew I'd lost power. I didn't know if it was the engines, if it was fuel, if it was air, what it was. And we took a wave on the side of the boat, that laid the boat pretty much on its side. I went flying through the engine room and I fell on top of the air compressor. Well, I quickly found out what my problem was because the air compressor motor, the bolts were so rusted up they broke free and the motor had slid where it couldn't catch the pulley. Well, when I fell on top of the pulley, it pushed the belt down, which pushed the motor out, and the air compressor caught. But the problem with that is my finger ran through the pulley and it tore my finger off.
If you guys can see this right now, Junior's holding his right hand up and he's missing his whatever finger that is.
That's my ring finger.
Yeah, the ring finger.
It just spun the tip of the finger right off. So I knew what my problem was. I knew
had two problems.
I had two problems. I had a boat that didn't have power and I had a finger that was missing.
Right.
So first thing, get the boat under power. So I figured out what's going on. I got the motor tightened up. We got the air pressure back. We got the mains back up and running. I come up. I tell the crew, I says, hey, we got a slight problem. Hold up my hand. They're freaking out. Oh, my God, we got to go back to Dutch.
This isn't it.
I'm like, hey, we're 20 hours from Dutch Harbor, maybe 25 hours. We're 4 hours from the gear. We're going to go up. We're going to get the gear. We're going to move it down to safety. Then we'll go in and I'll get medical attention. I knew they couldn't save my finger. If you can't get that finger on in 8 hours, it's not even worth your time. So I knew the finger was gone. It wasn't even worth it. But the crew's like, oh, you're in shock. And I'm like, no, I'm the captain. I'm not in shock. I'm being logical. We got to get this gear moved. If we don't have gear, we can't haul crab pots. So we go up, we get the gear moved, get it moved down to St. George. In the meantime, the strike had settled. So as I'm going down to get medical attention and the rest of the fleet's coming out to start fishing, there was no way for me to get another captain in to relieve me. So my crew that had been up there for a month beforehand, they've been on strike for 3 weeks, so they're 7 weeks in. Now, if their captain goes home, they're not going to make any money. So we get in the clinic. The doctor's like, hey, we got to get you out. You got to get on antibiotics. You got to go home. You got to rest. And I says, so the reality is I'm going to go home, sit on my couch for 3 weeks while my finger heals, or I can sit in the captain's chair for 3 weeks and I can let it heal right there. And he says, no, I can't advise that. So I went out against doctor orders. I told him, I says, listen, it's going to be a 10 to 18 day season, no big deal. Give me antibiotics for 20 days. And he gave me antibiotics for 20 days. It ended up being like a 28 or 38 day season. So I ran out of antibiotics, got a staph infection in my hand. I got super sick. I was so sick I had to tape my hands to the throttles just so I could operate the boat. The season finally closes, I think it was 8 or 10 days after I ran out of antibiotics. We get into Dutch. I go in. They immediately life flight me out because I had the streaks running up my arm. I was about ready to get the staph infection. It was in my bones. The staph infection was in my bones. It was working its way to my heart. They got me out to the Anchorage. I had surgery on my finger. They couldn't get it under control. So they went back in for another surgery, and on the third surgery they came in and said, hey, look, we got to take the hand. If we don't take the hand, you're going to die. We cannot get this staph infection under control. And I said, man, you take my hand, I can never work again. Don't and I wasn't thinking in the right state of mind.
Mm-hmm.
Chop the hand, save the life. Now I can look back and say that was the dumbest thing I ever did. So the doctor, he conferred with another colleague, and he says, we're going to try one more thing when we got you under. If that doesn't work, we're taking the hand. So what he ended up doing is, you can see the scar right there, right at the base of the ring finger. They cut me open right there, and they shoved the IV pick right into the bone. So it was basically back flushing through the bone, through the tip of the bone and everything, and through all the tendons and stuff. And then they took my hand, they kind of pressed it like you're cutting off the circulation to your wrist, putting your hand towards your forearm, but just enough where it would still have enough blood supply. It wouldn't kill the hand, but it would help slow the blood going through the rest of my body, and it worked. Well, so when I come out of surgery, all I see is this big bandage, and that where my hand should be isn't anymore. Yeah. So I start tearing at the thing, and my wife's like, no, don't touch it, it's there. And I tore down until I could see a fingertip, and when I seen a fingertip, I stopped. And after that, I kind of got healed up. Word got around that, hey, this kid, he'll do anything out there to stay fishing. Guy called me up. He had a brand new boat and says, hey, I want you to come run my boat. It was the Vixen. It was Mike Wall. And I says, Mike, I don't have that much experience, dude. And he's like, dude, I heard what you did. He says, I don't need you to have experience. You're not going to quit on me. So I went and ran the Vixen for 2-3 years. And then my dad came back to me. And the fisheries had got really small by then, and there wasn't enough work. My dad and my uncle were going around the clock on the Arctic Lady, and there just wasn't enough work for both of them to be on the boat. So my dad decided he wanted to go buy a boat and kind of start his own operation. But by then he was at an age where he's like, I can't really do this on my own. I'm really trying to get out of the fishery. So he called me up and we decided to tag team up. We bought the Seabrook, I think in 1999 or 2000. Don't quote me on which year that was. My dad bought in first. I bought in a year later because I had to get a little bit of money put together. Times were pretty tough back then. I was making 50, 60 grand as a captain. We were fishing 8-10 day seasons by that point. The boats were tied up most of the time. It was pretty lean times, but it was an opportunity. We knew that the Seabrook was a good opportunity for us to get ownership, and we were somehow able to scratch it together and buy the boat. And then we started entering in this cod fishery. So we use our crab pots, but we put these plastic fingers in. The fingers open up, the fish swim in. Fingers close, the fish can't get out. So with these crab fisheries being so short, the cod fishery was an alternative for us to make some money and have something to do with the boat. So we got pretty serious about it, and we actually started getting pretty good at it. And we got really, really good at it over the years and kind of became the top cod boat for a number of years. We were always in the top 5%. And we kind of got a reputation that, hey, you can make some money in cod. And then, as things progressed, I think in 2009 or 2010, we were approached by Deadliest Catch. I think 2008 was the first time we told them no, we're not interested. Then 2009, no, we're not interested. 2010, they called us up again, and I thought, well, we'll give it a try. So we jumped on the show in 2010, and I was on for 4 seasons, and I had a back surgery. My back was giving me a lot of problems. I'd had pots dropped on me, and I had a blown out disc in my back, and then sitting in the chair, I got a little soft in the midsection, got about 30-40 pounds overweight like most captains do. I started having some very severe back problems, and I got to the point where I couldn't walk. They lifted me off the boat. I went in and I had a back surgery that basically took me out of the fisheries for about 5 years. It took me about 5 years to get it corrected. I had multiple surgeries on my back, ended up having to blew a disc in my neck and had to have that replaced as well. And I never thought I'd ever be in the fisheries again. I never thought I'd be able to come back fishing. Last year, the Seabrook, we had multiple captains running it over the years, and we just couldn't find a producer. So the boat just kept getting more neglected, and we just weren't making any money with it. Dad asked me, what do you want to do? And I said, well, you know what, at this point, let's just sell the boat. No desire to, I can't go up and run it. Let's just sell the boat. So I flew in last August after tendering, and I was coming up to just kind of see what we needed to do to fix the boat up. I got up there, and it was just a bunch of little petty things. So I got the boat fixed up, and I'm like, well, the cod season's right around the corner. I says, yeah, I'll go out and I'll do what I can just to try and generate a little bit of revenue. And we ended up doing very, very well with it. I'm like, oh, hey, I made it through that. Well, king crab season's right here. Might as well just do that. And so I did the king crab fishery, and then, I realized I could do that, and so I kind of slowly started getting back into it over this last year.
Your body was holding up?
Body was holding up, doing pretty well. It was a struggle in the beginning, but, I was able to tough it out. And so I decided, oh, okay, well, maybe I'll stick around for a little bit. Then the opportunity came for this Lady Alaska. This is
your second boat ever.
My second boat ever, and this is a monster of a boat. It's it's 138 foot long. It's 32 foot wide. It's one of the biggest boats in the fleet. It's like the Cadillac. I've got the little sports car with the Seabrook, which is small, nimble, but it's a very active boat. And I remember from working on deck how nice this thing rode and how big it was and spacious, and it was. I guess I just, I've always had boat envy over this boat. When it came for sale and the opportunity was there, I bought the boat just on a whim without really looking it over too well and really strategizing whether I wanted to be back in the fisheries or not. But I guess, it's like, somewhere down deep in my thought process, I wanted to get back into crab fishing. Well, whenever you buy a new boat, you're pretty well committed.
There's no way out.
Yeah, there's no way out now. I honestly, I knew that if I bought this boat, I'm at least committed to this fishery for at least 7 years.
Yeah.
It's a 7-year commitment to get one of these boats paid back, get it back into shape, and get it operational where you can make some money with it.
Mm-hmm. So, Junior, let's talk about great experience all the way up to here. Let's talk about the scariest time that you've had at sea.
Funny enough, the scariest time I've ever had at sea was on the Lady Alaska here about a couple of weeks ago. I've always been in some pretty hairy situations out at sea and never really been nervous because I knew I could get my way through it. But I knew the Seabrook like the back of my hand. If something went wrong, I knew exactly what it was. I knew how to fix it, what it would take to get it fixed, and about how much time. We were coming out with the Lady Alaska. It's rated for 288 pots in icing conditions. So we had 200 pots on. I wanted to give a little cushion because, the boat hasn't been out in a while.
88 pots is a lot of cushion.
88 pots is a lot of cushion until it isn't. And we found out it wasn't. We were coming out for the beginning of a Peleo season. We just lost the Scandies Rose, which is a big monster boat just like the Lady Alaska. They got in icing conditions, rolled over, lost 5 of the 7 crew members. One of them being the captain, Gary Cobham, which I knew very well. He was one of my fishing partners.
And his son.
So that was pretty traumatic for us, right at the beginning of the year. And we went out cod fishing, and it just kind of weighed on my mind, and I'm trying to get a feel for this boat again because it's been so many years since I've been on it. I was kind of starting to feel comfortable that I had everything under control and knowing what was going on. We come in, we made some repairs on the boat, some problems that we'd had with during the cod season, got all those repairs fixed. We're heading out for a Peleo, and we find out that there had been a repair that we didn't know about, and somebody had left an absorbent pad in one of the fuel tanks. Well, that absorbent pad had disintegrated, and there's no way of ever knowing that. There's no way to tell. You can't see in your fuel tanks. That had disintegrated, and it went through our fuel system and plugged our entire fuel system up for both our mains and our generator, killed all 3 of them within 30 seconds. So now we're dark ship. I have no power, no propulsion, and I've got 3 slack tanks of water. Icing conditions with 200 pots on. The boat went from about a 10-degree list in about 15 minutes. It was to a 25-degree list. The starboard rail was underwater. We had water going up into the forepeak. We were back in the engine room trying to get a generator running so we could get the tanks stabilized and get righted up and try and get some lights so we could see. We're working off flashlights. Pitch dark in the engine room. We found out what the problem was. We had to tear all the fuel systems apart. We got everything drained out. We got as much of that absorbent pad as we could out. We got a generator up and running, got lights on, got the tanks pressed. That helped a little bit. And then we had to blow some of our crab tanks out so that we could get the boat light and righted back up. Then we got our mains going, and then I was able to get into the weather, so we were just kind of idling up into the weather. You never want, if you've got a listing situation, you never want to have the weather on the stern because that's where you can breach the boat, and the boat will roll over. You always want to be bucking into it. And so we had everybody kind of checking things out. They went up forward, and they're like, the bow's flooded, and I'm like, oh my God. Luckily, there was a boat nearby. He had a spare pump. We got our emergency pump going. We were able to get the water out of the bow. But I tell you what, there was that whole entire time I kept my calm for my crew. But in my mind, I was like, I don't know how we're going to get out of this. Are we going to be in the same situation as the Scandies Rose? Are we going down? I mean, I could not get the engines fired off, and we just kept getting heavier and heavier because it was so cold. We were already leaning to the starboard from the icing conditions. We were dead in the trough on the starboard side, so every wave that hit us was like an ice magnet. You could just watch the ice growing on the side of the boat, and we just kept getting heavier and heavier.
In your mind, was there a point where you were going to call it? I mean, were you already thinking Mayday, survival suits?
Yeah, I honestly, another 10 minutes and I probably would have called it. I probably would have had to call it and say, hey, we got to get off this thing. We got to get off. But when I got that generator fired off, it was like just the littlest sense of hope. You had that little sense of
lights came back on.
Yeah, the lights came back on. There's a sense of hope, sense of relief.
There's a boat close by.
Boat close by. We had a boat that was 100 yards off our side, just standing by. So I knew, okay, well, we need to try and get this problem solved. I got a generator now. I can start my pumps up. I can start getting water out of the areas that shouldn't have water in it. I can get one of my tanks pressed. I can get the other ones blown out, get us lightened up, and we slowly started righting the boat back up, and we got the boat where it was sitting level again. Once we had the boat sitting level, then I felt calm again. I knew, okay, we can drift in this. It's no problem because the boat's level. And then we got our main engines going. We got, we knew what our problem was. We knew how to fix it. We haven't had any more problems with that absorbent pad plugging up because we only got about half the absorbent pad out of the tank. We don't know if the other half's in there or if it was just a little piece that was left in there. Yeah, we don't know if it dissolved. We have
because
no
had you
idea.
known it was in there, it
You can't know what's left. I mean, that's one thing that kind of concerns me a little bit, but I also know now how to correct the problem. We know we've got bypasses set up now for the tank, so if we do plug up, we can plumb directly into the engines at a higher point where we're not going to suck anything in. So I can always figure something out. I just need time to make a solution. And at that point in time, I just didn't have the time. I thought, I honestly thought in the back of my mind, oh boy, this could be it.
It had to be. It had to really increase the anxiety and the stress, knowing the Scandies rose. But we're just a couple weeks away from. Well, a few weeks away from that happening.
Oh man, I tell you what. I mean, 3 weeks ago, the Scandies rose went down, and you think in the back of your mind, you think that'll never happen to me. And then when it does, it's just like, I mean, it's the most helpless feeling you can ever have in the world.
Yeah. Okay, well that was traumatic. So let's talk about the best time.
The best times that I've ever had was probably, I think, 2012. We were out fishing. The ice was down, which was kind of a bad situation, and we didn't have a whole lot of quota to fish that year. And the ice was coming down. I decided to stay out and fight the ice. Most of the fleet had went home. Well, about the time I got finished up with my crab season, I caught my quota. Boats were starting to come back, and they were panicking. So they were calling us up, and they were saying, hey, I need you to fish a trip of Apelio for me. Oh, yeah, no problem. And it just one left after another and another and another. And, for the Seabrook, a big season for that, 700,000-800,000 pounds, maybe 1 million. That year we put in 2.2 million pounds of crab. I mean, it was awesome. It was the best year we've ever
had. 2.5 years of crab done.
Yeah, exactly. We got it was what turned our operation around because, we'd been doing fairly well, but we never had that big break to get ahead, get the boat fixed up just the way we needed to.
New paint job and a new chair?
Yeah, new paint job, new chair, new hydraulics, all the stuff that we'd always wanted to do, had on this wish list. At 2012, after we'd finished that season off, we had the money to do it, and we did it. We got that boat cherried. That was such a neat feeling to, have the ability to just go do all the projects you've ever wanted to do to the boat. Most of the time, you got a schedule and budget, and it's, it takes 7 years, and something else will go wrong, so that you have to, the luxury things that you've always wanted to do, you can't do, and you have to go do the maintenance things. So that was pretty cool. That was one of the neatest experience I had, and the fishing was so good.
It's the boat lotto.
Yeah, it was. It was the boat lotto for sure. Boat lotto.
So what about? Would you change anything?
Change anything in the industry, or change anything in
that's your career?
Oh, everybody always asks me that. Would you do anything different? The reality is, as much as I'd like to say yes, I would do something different, I couldn't imagine myself doing it any different because I don't think I'd be the person that I was today if I knew what I knew now, but I did it differently. I don't think I would. I'm a slave driver. You ask anybody that's ever worked for me or has wanted to work for me, they're like, he's pretty hard to work for. It's not that I'm.
Because your dad beat the crap out of you.
Well, my dad, my dad. Honestly, my dad instilled that work ethic into me, and if there's something to do, we're going to do it. And a lot of boats, there's a lot better fishermen than me. Let me put it to you that way. First off, there's a lot of guys that are more talented than me and can catch crab a heck of a lot easier. For me, I've always been able to be a producer just because I try and work harder than the next guy. It just, and it's hard. When guys come in for big storms, I'll stay out and I'll work through the storm. I probably shouldn't do that, but it's just, For me to be on a competitive level, I've just got to stay working. When guys are working 18 hours, we'll work 20 hours. We always just try and put that little extra effort because, there's guys that just naturally can find crab and do things easy, and I'm jealous of those guys, but I know I can compete with them if I just put in a little extra effort, and that's what I do. I've never settled. I've never been satisfied with just doing okay. I've always wanted to be at the top, and the only way I can do that is put in the effort.
Put in the time. What about advice for young guys trying to get into our industry and into the fishery?
The biggest problem that I see today with young guys trying to get in, and it's a generational thing, nothing against the millennials, but their parents wanted them to have a better life than they had growing up, so they've spoiled these kids, and there's very few of them. They want to make the money, but they don't want to put in the effort. The biggest thing that I can say is don't worry about the money, just put in the effort and the money will come. And that is so hard to instill in these young guys. That could be in any industry. It could be in any industry. It doesn't even have to be the crab fishing industry. Put in the effort, the money will come on the backside. Don't try and get the money, worry about the money. Oh, this guy's making this guy's making that. I should be making the same because, I'm doing the same job as him. No, it doesn't work that way, man. You got to put the effort in first.
You do. Junior, before we close up, is there anything else you want to add?
Not really. It's just kind of one of those things that, if you think you want to be a crab fisherman, don't. If you know you want to be a crab fisherman, you can try. Not saying you're going to be successful.
Right. Yeah, it's tough.
Yeah, it's a tough industry.
Not only the job, the temperatures that you're in, the environment.
The toughest thing about it is a lot of people can do the work, but they can't handle the environment. It's super cold out. There's actually jobs that are tougher than crab fishing, but you're throwing the element of the Bering Sea in. You're working on an active platform. So that meant burning the energy just trying to stand up is what makes this job so difficult.
40-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah, 40-mile-an-hour winds, sideways, sweet. You're wet all the time. You're cold, then that just sucks the energy right out of you. So, if you think you want to be a crab fisherman, don't waste our time. If you know you want to be a crab fisherman, you can give it a try. I'm not saying you're going to make it, but you can at least give it a try.
And don't forget to turn your gloves inside out.
Yeah, and don't forget to turn your gloves inside out.
All right, Junior. Well, thanks for taking the time.
Yeah, you bet.
Today, and we wish you luck. You still got a few trips to make?
Still got a couple of trips left, and then we'll get this boat back to Kodiak and do some repairs on it and get it ready for the next season.
That sounds real good, and I'll be looking forward to my Seabrook hat then.
That's right.
At the end of today's game.
No, I think it's going to be the other way around. I think the Niners are going to win, Chiefs are going down. I'm going to be getting the hat.
By the time this airs, it'll already be decided.
I know, right?
We'll know, but
yeah.
All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in again, and Junior again. Thanks for doing it, and look for his new merchandise. I'm sure.
Yeah, we'll see.
Is Seabrook still up?
Seabrook's still up. Yep, Seabrook's still up, and Lady Alaska will have some stuff ready here shortly. So, appreciate it, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
All right, thanks. We'll talk to you guys later.
Thanks for listening to Galley Stories. We hope you like what the net brought in. Please leave us a review on iTunes. Whether you like it or not, we're not fishing for compliments. Look us up on Facebook and Twitter too, and reach out to us at galleystories@gmail.com.